Yeah. Okay. Whew. Okay. If everybody can mute themselves, or I'll mute everybody, and then. Okay. Thank you all. Sorry for the delay. I had a little technical glitch, but we are here, the Legislative Tourism Caucus, and we have our guests today, Commissioner Heather Pelham from the Department of Tourism and Marketing, and Commissioner Craig Bolio from the Department of Taxes. I do want to have some time for discussion about this and questions, because I'm sure there will be some. And but I want to first, obviously, turn over the reins to the two commissioners to talk about the governor's. The governor has a tourism funding proposal that he offered in his budget address, and we're just going to hear the details of that and the reasons behind it and what it might do to help our tourism and hospitality industry in the state. So Commissioner Pelham and Commissioner Bolio, I'm just going to hand it over to you. As people have questions, feel free to raise your hands, blue hands. I'm sure they'll do it during their presentation. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer them, and I'll keep an eye out. Okay, commissioners, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Heidi. I can go ahead and give a brief overview of the proposal, and then I will defer to my colleague, Commissioner Bolio, for questions in terms of the mechanics on it. What we're looking at here, I think everyone is well aware of the investment that's needed in our tourism industry, not only to recover from the severe disruption that we've seen, but also to stay competitive in the long term. So we can certainly debate the why if you'd like, but concentrating on the how. We've looked at different types of funding mechanisms in the past. We know that there has been resistance to a dedicated funding stream, and yet we also know how incredibly important it is to really have a consistent source of funding to support this industry over the long term. So where we landed on with the governor's proposal is looking at rooms and meals tax receipts, but looking at those receipts that are above the projections for the year. So if we take the receipts that actually come in at the end of the fiscal year in June and compare that to the most recent projection in January, we're seeing that as money that has not already previously been part of the budget, and thus potentially has a little bit more discretion into how those funds are allocated. So that's the central concept of what we're talking about here. The fund would be seeded with $1 million to start. And one of the key sort of provisions about this is that we understand that excess portion will vary from year to year. So this fund would be able to retain a balance, and that's really one of the key points here, is that by being able to retain a balance in this fund, it would provide funding in years when budgets are tight. And we wouldn't be having to go back and to ask for additional money, and we would be able to benefit and save funds in the good years to be able to kind of ride out that storm. So that is the overall concept of how this would work. The legislative language is going to be part of the economic development bill that will start in the House Commerce Committee. And so that's an overview. I'm happy to share my screen into how much that would have provided the department in years past. Perhaps that's a place to start, unless, Craig, if there's anything you want to add in terms of mechanics that maybe I've glossed over at this point. And I'm happy to have this be an open discussion, really.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I'm happy to jump in because some folks have asked, what are the mechanics that you envision and how to do that? So generally, we have two consensus revenue forecasts a year, in the summer and then in the January e-board meeting. So the plan here would be to use, at the end of a fiscal year, the January consensus revenue forecasts to determine if the receipts have exceeded the forecast. Obviously, folks may recognize the challenge by trying to do it throughout the year, right? The forecast can change in January after the summer, and so you don't want to be in a position where the forecast has changed and now suddenly the fund doesn't actually collect any money. And what may be an intuitive idea, but it's also if the meals and rooms receipts do not exceed the consensus forecast, then the fund simply gets zero for that year. And so, as Commissioner Pelham mentioned, one of the keys is to be able to provide funding in the healthy years to help support in the years where there's a struggle. One piece of this proposal that I really like is that it's businesses in this industry that do the work to collect the tax on behalf of the state, right? And those funds, most of them go to the general fund, which helps government and should help their businesses. But this really provides a much more explicit link, that at least a portion of the work that they do to collect those taxes for us will go back into an agency whose primary mission is to help promote and enhance and increase their business. So I really like that piece of it as the tax commissioner, to especially when we have businesses collecting taxes on our behalf, have that link that there's some help for those businesses and a recognition that they're doing work on the state's behalf as well.
Can I just interrupt? I want to really understand this. So first of all, would there still be a general fund appropriation, just a standard base appropriation to VDTM on an annual basis, as there is in the appropriations bill every year?
Yes, this would be supplemental funding.
Okay, and that base appropriation in let's just use 2019 in general. 2019 was about 3 million, give or take.
Give or take. We're for fiscal 22, it's 3.5. There is a jump there primarily because of some additional positions that were brought into the department for some of our economic development marketing work and the chief marketing office.
Okay, and this supplemental, so if, for example, the consensus was $100 million, right? The January revenue, the consensus forecast was 100 million, which I know it's a lot more, but and we brought in 101 million. Is it the $1 million, an entire $1 million would go into this fund, or is it a part of that? Is it a percentage of that?
That's a great question. So we're only talking about, and I should have clarified this, so I apologize. We're only talking about the general fund portion of the excess receipts. So as folks may know, the meals and rooms tax is split three ways: 25% education fund, 69% general fund, and 6% to the clean water fund. So what we're talking about in this proposal are the excess.
Craig, Commissioner, can you repeat that? It's 25% to education fund.
Yep, 6% clean water, and then 69% general fund. And so what this proposal asks to do is to take that 69% general fund that would be excess receipts. So the education fund would continue to retain excess receipts, and so would the clean water fund.
So in my example, 690,000 would go to this fund for tourism and marketing.
You got it.
And if you'd like, I can share my screen now, Heidi, with a spreadsheet we have for what this would have meant in the last few years, if that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
Can folks see that? So we're looking at the past fiscal year. So we have the actual rooms and meals tax collected at the end of the fiscal year, what that forecast was in January that Craig spoke about, what the change was. Then we have, VDTM's budget as per the governor's recommend. So if we look at that differential and 69% of it, just the general fund portion, if it's a positive, then that's what VDTM would have received in that year. If it's a negative, then no additional funding would have been received by the department. So you can see in the last couple years, it would have meant, about $500,000 extra to the department. We would have gotten a much larger amount in fiscal 17. But you can also see that, in 16 and certainly 20, we would not have received any additional funding. So there's some projections about what this would have meant. So you can see the importance of being able to save money, let's say, from fiscal 17 to be able to, mitigate the fact that additional funding would not be received in some years.
So I'm just going to continue with questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, please. I can leave that up if you'd like.
Yeah, please leave it up. That's helpful. So since this is something, the hope obviously and that the thought, I'm assuming, is because you give more to marketing, more is going to come in, and it'll help the general fund, the clean water fund, and the education fund as a result. Like more revenues will come in. If, for example, you had received an additional almost $3 million in 17, but the additional money in 2018 was only 500,000. How would you anticipate spending that money so that it's a consistent, it can't go into regular, you have a certain number of marketing programs that you do how would you do it so that we didn't all of a sudden have like this great thing and then we had to eliminate stuff the following year, do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And that's a great question. Certainly with a fund like this, it would take a few years to kind of have some predictability as to what we would expect from the fund. So honestly, I would look at this conservatively to start, not knowing, we're talking about projections, which is interesting because, the closer the projections come to reality, the less that potentially means for the department. So, we'd really want to think carefully about the use of those funds, but it really would be how we achieve the goals that we have already set out for the department. How do we support this industry that is creating these funds? How do we make sure that we stay competitive? How do we, extend the reach of our message? How do we extend that not only geographically, but throughout, the entire calendar year? Again, the same themes that we've talked about in terms of, our limited budgets so far have just made it challenging for us not only to keep up with our neighbors who are, direct competitors to us, but to be able to reach new visitors who might be thinking about coming to Vermont. And I see there's a couple hands up, so.
Oh, there are? Oh, great. Representative Kimball.
Thank you, Heidi. Good morning, and I have some questions, knowing that we'll be having an opportunity to discuss this more in committee. But first, just a reservation about our legislature's ability to not withstand the wording in statute about how much money. So I always worry about a dedicated fund from statute. I guess the second question is, even though the fund may be there and contributing money into the tourism fund, would you still have to then present your spending plan to the legislature for approval? So you need budgetary approval after that. I think that's correct, but is that how you understand it as well?
To be honest, I'd have to think a little bit more about where that would fit in and talk to our budget folks, because I can see how there might be a delay there, to your point. Like, so there's money in the fund, then we would draw out of that fund. It would go into the next year's budget, become part of our spending plan. I think that's the way it probably would need to work, yes.
Okay, and then in years in which your revenue is down, or it's not the rooms and meals tax is not meeting budget, then with this construct, money is not coming back out of the fund.
Correct. Well, no, I'm sorry. So the fund is there so that we would be to have that more consistent funding. So even if funds don't go into, different word, even if revenues don't go into the fund, the idea would be, even though revenues aren't going into the fund that year, we would still have access to the fund for that, to increase the stretch of the budget.
Right, so it's not a shared risk in that sense, right? Yeah, it's only in years in which there's excess money. In years in which there's not enough money, then it's not coming back out of the fund for other budgetary uses of the rooms and meals tax.
Correct. It stays in there, yes.
But so the fund, I get it. So the fund, it wouldn't, we just keep this fund year over year over year, and you'd spend some of it, you'd include some of it in your budget, but this would just be a fund that builds over time, and then we incorporate it into your VDTM budget. I see.
Correct.
I mean, every year. Okay. Representative Wood.
Thank you. Does the proposal, so the floor is obviously zero. If there are no no receipts in excess of what the projections were. Is there a ceiling? Is there a maximum amount or percentage or whatever entertained in this proposal?
We have not set a ceiling as of yet. That is certainly something that we could discuss.
Thank you.
I have a quick question for Commissioner Bolio. So these funds, even though I'm a second term legislator, I feel like I'm a little bit needs more information on the fund on these funds. So this would be anything above excess on this rooms and meals of the 69% of the rooms and meals tax would go into a special fund, and that'd be carried over year to year. And is this happen often? Like, how often is this happening throughout state government? And has it been successfully operated in this way?
I'm happy to take that one. I'm not an expert on how many total special funds we have. I know there are quite a few. This particular model where it's only using excess receipts may be somewhat unique. But even something like the Clean Water Fund is an example of a special fund with dedicated revenue source where we utilize that. I think the total number of special funds, but not all of them use a model like this, is in the hundreds. So it's not unique to have a special fund. No, this example of using just the excess receipts may be unique around state government. I'm happy to follow up and see if there are others that use that model. Yeah,
I guess I'm just interested in the success. So the historical success of a model like this, and if we're going to go forward, then I want to make sure that it's successful. And then for Commissioner Pelham, by this raising this extra amount of money and through time, you're seeing the historical significance of this. Is this kind of where do you feel comfortable with this kind of a budget for your for tourism and marketing? Does this give you enough bump up to feel like a little stronger and a little more relevant for the region?
I see this as a good first step. We understand that there's a lot of pressures on the general fund budget. And so, we're looking for a way that we can support the industry and continue to provide those resources for the department in a way that's sustainable. So we're seeing this as, a compromise in a way of understanding that there's a lot of different, like I said, stresses on the receipts that come into the state. But this is a way to continue to get us, in a continual fashion to keep building that. And the idea being that the more we build up the industry, then, it more comes into the fund. So.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
Representative Austin.
Thank you. And this is a little bit of a follow-up on Representative Jerome's question. I'm wondering, it looks like if we look at the region, states around our region, it looks like their investment in tourism, is proportional to the returns that they receive. And I'm wondering what the rationale is for such a low appropriation to your industry when the investment, it looks like the returns are so good.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, there's a couple ways we could look at this. I mean, for instance, in we've suggested starting this fund with an initial investment of $1 million. That certainly could be more to get us started. And yes, you are absolutely right. When we look at our budgets, compared to the rest of New England, we are a small fraction. Well, we receive much less than they do, as we've discussed. This question about the size of our investment in the tourism industry is one that just in the time that I've been in this position, I feel like we need to keep working on that conversation so folks really understand exactly how important it is, and understanding that there may be more than one way to do this. This is a proposal to get us started having that conversation about what an investment in tourism is going to mean, for our economy. There may be other ways to do this, but we felt like this was a way that maybe we could make some progress in that direction.
Thank you.
Let me just add, because these these last two questions, you know, we're talking here, obviously we have the base funding in the appropriation coming out of the general fund. This would be an additional, a supplemental fund that would grow over time, hopefully, and I think, I'm confident it would, even if we have a couple of years that it doesn't because of our revenue forecasts. But in many cases, and Maine is a good example, they actually have a it's a direct percentage of their rooms and meals tax that goes into tourism marketing. And I think now in Maine, it might be 5 or 7%, is something along, I can try to get that information. And that was something we were trying to put forward in 2019, I believe it was, to talk about that, thinking that would give us, you know, the kind of resources many of us wanted. I'm assuming that this, and I think Commissioner Pelham, you mentioned this, is that there are a lot of pressures on the general fund, which is why you all chose not to do a percentage of the actual rooms and meals tax revenue, like the Clean Water Fund, for example, that you're doing the excess revenues because we just don't have, because of the pressures, I'm assuming.
Exactly. It's just a recognition of, you know, again, I see this as, you know, let's advance the conversation about what an investment in tourism would do for our economy.
But to be clear, in Maine and these other states, when they do invest a percentage of their rooms and meals tax revenues, overall, it grows and grows and grows, that budget. And that's why I think they're so much further along than we are in terms of spending on tourism marketing.
It definitely is it's a greater amount of money. You're right. That you can get from a strict percentage. I mean, if you'd like to see that, I actually do have in this spreadsheet, I can show you what you know, you might be looking at for different numbers. This is based on just, you know, 1% of, if we went from 1% of that 69% of the general fund, you know, so you're looking at, you know, it comes in about $1 million.
Oh, that's actually great to see. So the G is the proposal, what would come from the proposal, and J and K are what we would see if we did a 1%, just use 1% of the 69%.
Yep.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay. So the economic development bill has, this is going to be in the large omnibus economic development bill?
Yes, it will be. And as I understand it, it's going to come to the House Commerce, and I'm not sure exactly on the Senate. I feel there may be different pieces. It may not all be in one bill in the Senate, from what I understand.
So let's talk politics for a minute. The Appropriations Committee really does not like dedicated funds or creating new dedicated funds. They had been trying to eliminate the number of dedicated funds there are. That was the former chairperson's idea. Now we have a new chair in appropriations, so that's just a reality. I bring it up because it's something that we have to consider as to the resistance to establishing a new fund.
Well, and to your point, you know, that's, you know, one of the reasons why we're starting with what may seem like a modest increase, but it still is set up to accomplish our goals, which is, if we are collecting revenues from this sector, how can we use, you know, arguably a very small percentage of what is collected to then support that same sector, and then grow more revenue that the rest of the entire budget will benefit from.
That was practice for you.
Hey, Charlie, I completely agree. And this is, I think this is partly why I think we wanted them here today in front of the Tourism Caucus, to make sure that our members understood the proposal and what, and it is modest. I would echo the commissioners. It is modest. It doesn't actually take a percentage. I would prefer that 1%, frankly, after looking at that spreadsheet. I would prefer that 1% out of the 69%. It's more consistent. It could grow our budget, and we could be in a really good position in about a decade, I think, at that point. I think that's why we wanted to get it in front of the Tourism Caucus. I think we should get it out to our folks at home, our chambers of commerce and hospitality groups at home, and see. I'm not sure what kind of conversations the administration has had with the advocacy groups or the people representing some of the hospitality industry. But I will also say this: when we passed the dedicated fund for clean water, I remember making clear on the floor that this is certainly a precedent. We used rooms and meals taxes to start a dedicated fund, and clean water was important, and I supported that, ensuring that we had the funding to do that. And I would hope that people would consider this to be, especially after understanding now, I think a greater understanding among legislators of how important the hospitality industry is to our state's economy. And I would hope that they would see that. And I think it's up to us to do some of that lobbying. And I think we can start. I think we need to start like immediately if we're supporting this. And again, I would certainly prefer that 1% of the 69%, but I'm willing to willing to start more modestly in this case.
Yep.
And if there are other concerns or thoughts, whether it's in this discussion or otherwise, I'm very much welcome to the discussion.
Representative McCoy.
Well, perhaps we should keep it at this point because during negotiations, it may go down lower, Heidi. I don't know. Reach for higher than your expectation is a little bit higher, and then you can settle for something that's lower. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, that's all kind of the questions.
Yeah, the
So-
wording in the bill reflects what Heather and Craig just laid out. So it's, you're right, Patty. If you come in and say, we need 1%, we should have 1%, but we're willing to, anyway, the art of negotiation, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So Charlie, that bill is something that will be introduced. It's
currently in drafting right now.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we haven't obviously, as a caucus, gone on the record supporting this or anything, but I guess I would ask this in advance of that. Charlie, what would you suggest our next steps are as a caucus in this case?
Well, I think once the bill is
with regard to your committee, and I think
Yeah.
actually, Stephanie, are you on that committee too? Yeah.
once the bill is released and the wording is really out there for folks, it's then appropriate for the Tourism Caucus to submit a letter to the committee and then to try to voice its support for the specific wording in the bill. So that's I'm not sure when the final draft is going to be released. I know it's in the works right now.
Okay. Representative Sibilia.
Just chiming in to support moving forward with this. I remember you talking about this, Heidi, on the floor with clean water very clearly, and all of the times that we have been trying to get appropriate funding for this really critical industry that, among other things, it funds a large part of our public education system, all of our education system, actually. Um, so, and then I would just note, hearing Rep. Kimball talk about, committees, the appropriations committees, not wanting to commit special funds. I understand that may be a principle, but we're able to do that for certain types of projects that we want to fund, right? So if it's a priority, then we find a way to do something like that. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to, if we want this, I feel like we've been fighting for this for so long, for more funds, that we really have to have our members weigh in, our hospitality businesses weigh in, our chambers weigh in. So that's all. It's totally support.
Thank you for that, Laura. I would like to get a feel from folks, and I don't want to put people necessarily on the spot right here if they are not supportive of it, but in some way, somehow I'd like to get an understanding if people are inclined to support this, and we can have a discussion or as a caucus obviously later, but I'd like to, if anybody else has anything to offer with regard to who, where you might be on this proposal, I'd love to hear it if you're willing to share it. Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Representative. So, when this bill was first, released by, or I think you asked for sign-ons, Heidi, unless I'm confusing this with something else.
Yes, sorry, I should make clear that the bill that I have introduced was sort of a placeholder for this. It was actually using 2% of the 69%, which would have been $2 million in addition for the fund. So my bill is different than this because they're using the above and beyond, anything that came in over the forecast. So just to be clear that that's a different bill. It was used as a placeholder for sort of getting the discussion started about a dedicated fund to tourism marketing. So sorry.
Okay. No, that's helpful. My comment is still, I think it's relevant for either, which is, as a new fresh person legislator, I'm, as soon as I see something, I'm like, well, what are the arguments against this? And who are the stakeholders who are pro and against? And it's interesting to me because what I've heard for arguments against this, besides I suppose some underlying concerns with, starting new funds, et cetera, is that, if we have limited dollars, we should direct them, directly to, Vermont individuals, our low to moderate income Vermonters, and not necessarily our businesses. And so I think we should do and both. I personally, businesses are a key part of how we're going to grow as a state, but clearly we also need to support our individual Vermonters. So my question is there a way to start to think about how we could collect data points that say, and because of this marketing investment, we saw this many dollars come into Vermont. Maybe that already exists, but I think to answer the question of like, is this just trickle down or whatnot? I think to the extent that we have that data to say, no, here you see the connection. I think that's something that, for folks who question, does marketing really help or whatnot? I think that's a great tool to have in the toolbox. And I'll stop there.
No, I appreciate that comment, and the department has worked hard to make sure that we are providing that kind of information in terms of our role in supporting not only this industry, but what that means for everyday Vermonters. I have definitely shared. I mean, for number one, just workforce alone, hospitality is 10% of our workforce. So when you're talking about everyday Vermonters, you're talking about 30,000 people who rely on this sector for their income. And when you look at the rooms and meals tax that's generated, we have made the calculation that because of that rooms and meals tax, that gives over $1,400 in property tax relief to Vermonters who, don't have to come up with that difference. Those are just some of the data points that we've used. And I'm happy to provide that to the committee, because I think that that is, that really is the issue here. When we talk about an investment in tourism, I think of it as an investment in rural economic development. It's that piece that really is the fabric to all of our communities, and is, honestly, it's going to be a huge part of this recovery. I think that something that is not lost on me is that, I feel like folks have sort of taken our tourist industry for granted over the years, that, that our natural beauty and our way of life will always be here to attract folks. And that may be the case, but if there's no place for them to stay and there's no place for them to eat, then, we really can't take advantage of the recovery that we might have had if we don't pay attention to, that tourism infrastructure and what it would mean to lose that if we are not supporting the industry.
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioner.
you.
And thank you, Representative Stebbins. That was important, I think, with regard to the data and making sure we get that information, that real data and information out to folks. Representative Kimball.
I think Representative Stebbins just hit on the arguments, because we know that marketing works, right? We know that marketing actually is important to any business or any industry. The knock against marketing is you can't generally tie a direct economic benefit to the dollars you spend unless it's a direct marketing campaign in which somebody responds directly to it and buys the item that you're selling, that you just marketed. So there's no direct tie. So that's the criticism of the auditor of marketing dollars that the state spends. It's a criticism of folks that don't think that we should be spending marketing dollars or state dollars on marketing because individual enterprises are doing it anyway. But that's the knock. That's reality that we have to face and discuss. But we know that marketing works. Companies know it, states know it, but it's just the real difficult thing is to show the exact impact. And so we have to recognize that.
And I would argue that we have to recognize that, and I totally agree. And as I've said, we've worked very hard to think of like the hard numbers behind all this. But I would encourage folks to not shy away from having that conversation of the fact that marketing works. Marketing is real. We didn't just make this up. This is the way business works. And there is a sort of a level of faith, and I don't think we should shy away from having that conversation with our colleagues to say that just because you can't tie this exact dollar to this exact purchase does not mean that marketing does not work.
I couldn't agree more with Charlie or Heather. I think that's great. And Representative Stebbins, again, that you hit the nail on the head with regard to trying to ensure that we get the word out to folks and make people understand. And I'm always willing to have the conversation. It can be frustrating sometimes, and I understand that, but it's our work to do. It's the work we need to do. There's a reason why Bud Light is still the best-selling beer in the world, and it is. And they do marketing really, really well. And I would argue that is a large part of the reason that it is the best-selling beer in the world. So.
And I guess I would just add that, what may seem like a modest proposal is really a recognition of, the resistance that, we may find to this proposal. But if we are able to establish this fund, this sets us up in the future to be able to keep adding to that fund and to keep having this conversation about what an investment in tourism is going to mean to bring revenues in that the entire state will benefit from.
Okay, there's no more questions on here. If anybody has any, it's your chance now to raise your hand, chime in. Okay, that was very helpful. That was a great. Thank you so much to both the commissioners. I just before we all hang up, I just want to kind of get an understanding of where we might be on other pieces of legislation real quick, and I didn't give anybody a heads up on this, but Representative Yantochka, your agritourism bill, do you have any update on that right now? Just
Yes,
very quickly.
Yeah, the Agriculture Forestry Committee is having a hearing on it this morning. I submitted a couple of names of witnesses that they might call, and so they're they're working on it, but I have no other update than that.
That's great. That's perfect. How about, I know that Representative Byrong isn't on here, but Representative Hango is. Just curious as to where the liquor, the alcohol, the DLC bill might be right now, if it's been introduced.
I don't think it's been introduced yet. It has not been introduced in our committee yet, and I am not sure if it's been introduced on the floor. I can tell you in two seconds. No, I don't think it has been introduced on the floor yet. So it should be coming soon.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, and then this economic development, my tourism funding bill, as I explained, was really a placeholder. The proposal for the administration, it was a dedicated fund of 2% from the 69%. So that has been introduced as in Ways and Means, but I think the focus will be on the governor's proposal, funding proposal. So I'm just going to set that one aside for now, and we'll talk about the governor's economic development proposal. When it's in drafting now, you said, right, Charlie?
Yes, it's still in drafting.
Okay. Okay, so anybody else have any updates on other things? So I'm going to send out a bill. I'd like people to think about this proposal, and I think we should set aside some time to discuss it and make sure we know. I would like to see if the Tourism Caucus have a position and have a position on this proposal, and see if we can help make it happen. That's just my pitch to everybody. But I think and we can think about it more, how to do that. And if we all, if we vote on it as a caucus, and then see where we go from there. Representative Jerome and I will discuss how we can put that together for the caucus. Next week, we are really, Representative Jerome, why don't you chime in about next week's meeting? Because I'm excited about next week's meeting for folks.
Sure, we have a really great lineup of people coming next week. So after hearing from a number of the caucus members that they've been hearing about the problems with workforce development in the industry, in the tourism and hospitality industry, I've invited Frank Pause of the Castleton University's Hospitality and Management Program, which is based in Killington, to come. And then along with Frank is Rob Magnan, who's now, I think he's an adjunct or a professor within this program. He's formerly of Killington, as well as the head of human resources at Killington, Judy Geiger. And then, and lastly, Amy Laramie, who is the vice president of communications or the director of communications at Killington. And they're going to discuss both the needs of sort of this management training program that Castleton's been operating, and they took it over after Green Mountain College closed. And then also the different levels of workers that are needed within the industry and the future. So I think it should be a very interesting conversation.
And just to echo, thank you, Stephanie, for setting that up. I'm excited for that. If folks in your area, for example, I'm going to make sure that my Stowe Area Association, that the Stowe Mountain Resort, that other places here, and that our local, State College folks know about it, and they might be able to live stream, because if this is something that's not happening in other places, it could be something to replicate in your areas. So I'm gonna just make sure that the word is out that this is happening and they can listen in. It's only an hour and it might be well worth their while. So I would anyway, that's just a pitch for that too. So okay, thank you so much, Commissioners Pelham and Bolio. That was really, really helpful to get us started on this, to help you help our industry through this time and then beyond, and hopefully get in a position within the next 5 or 10 years to really be at the top of our game, and inviting and welcoming guests from all over the world to Vermont in more numbers. So okay, I think that's it for now. I'll be in touch with everybody, and Representative Jerome and I will speak about how we might move forward on the funding proposal. And Charlie too.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Heidi.